morning, everyone. My name is Samantha Jackson. I'm Alliances Specialist focused on Microsoft here at NTT, and I'm honoured to be your host for this morning's event on Zero Trust. Before we begin this morning, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we work and live, and recognise their continuing connection to the land, water, and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I don't think any of us have to go too far back to remember a time where work was a place we went, where we used perimeter-based security models to keep corporate information safe. We would scan in using a passkey. We would log onto corporate networks to access corporate applications. We would give people phones and not worry about BYOD and what that implication that had on our security. In fact, if I go back even just 3 years, I was managing projects and working on a client site where I could access the bulk of my information and use VPNs to access some corporate applications. But other things like our finance system, I'd have to return to the office once a week to run financial reporting to give to the customer. And we didn't think any different. It was just kind of what we did to keep things secure. But we moved forward in probably only a couple of years, and work is now something we do, and for many, something you can do from anywhere. I mean, I take myself as an example. Just since COVID hit, I've worked from many places. I was in Sydney when Melbourne went into a lockdown and decided to borrow a laptop and work from a friend's house in the mountains for a couple of weeks. I've worked from my car in a car park in a regional town where it was the only place I could get internet connection to join a webinar. And most recently, I worked from my mum's dining room table as I waited for my sister to give birth to her first child. So, you can definitely see that I've taken to the flexible working. However, I'm sure for many CISOs, that's a bit of a heart attack. But as Gartner notes, the return to the workplace is not a return to normal. Normality today, for a large portion of the workforce, it has become working remotely. This compels organisations to reassess their security posture. A larger hybrid workforce means a bigger potential attack surface and greater security risks. Organisations need to move away from perimeter-based security models and adapt holistic approaches that incorporate devices, users, applications, and data to ensure ingrained security and data protection. But it's not just hybrid working that has seen this happen. People now have more options when it comes to determining where and how far and who they work for. The talent shortage is also driving this. In fact, the Microsoft 2020 Work Trends Index shows that remote job postings on LinkedIn have increased more than fivefold since the pandemic, and 46% of employees surveyed are now planning to move because they can work remotely. In fact, just this morning, I was listening to an interview with Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, on the Wall Street Journal, who's announced that his company will be going to a fully flexible model and allowing their people to work from anywhere for up to 90 days at a time. That completely changes the landscape. And as you can imagine, a globally distributed workforce is going to have significant implications on organisational policies, and no single approach is going to meet the expectations of everyone. The other thing that we're seeing shift the needle is the move to multi-cloud. While many organisations are already consuming cloud services, the shift to multi-cloud environments is also shifting the security landscape. It's no longer a box on-premise or an assessment of one cloud provider. It's now a responsibility shared between IT staff, multiple cloud vendors, and system integrators. This adds huge complexity. And as we're seeing, solutions are no longer an island. We're no longer updating them every 3 to 5 years, but they're constantly evolving. The change to one, has huge impacts on everything. And security governance and authentication behind the scenes is not as simple as an on-site policy change. Before I hand over to Jay and Dirk, who are going to take us through some real-life security scenarios that we're seeing, I just wanted to talk about why NTT has chosen to partner with Microsoft. We've been working together for over 20 years now, and we've seen the benefits of working together. The organisations we work with need to invest in security technologies for hybrid workers. They need to incorporate security at the application level and the infrastructure level. through flexible and scalable security solutions. NTT accelerates workplace transformation by architecting new ways to work that are hybrid, flexible, and secure, delivering a consistent and frictionless user experience while focusing on security and scalability at cost. Microsoft also focuses on creating a consistent and frictionless user experience. Their end-to-end integrated platform of cloud solutions across Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and Azure are built on a foundation of security and privacy. And they help every organization in every industry build resilience and improve the bottom line. In fact, many of you probably already have access to Microsoft's suite of security products within your E5 license, or if not, you're just a step away with your E3. And we're seeing that this can create huge efficiencies and cost savings for customers. I'll talk more to that later. In fact, NTT is so committed to the Microsoft Security Suite that in the last 12 months, we trained 115 members of our sales team on Zero Trust and why it is crucial for you. We'll hear a little bit more about Zero Trust from Dirk and Jay just shortly. We've also increased our Microsoft security certifications by 362% in the last 12 months. And across the Microsoft portfolio, the NTT team in Australia now hold 575 Microsoft certifications. For anyone that's tried to sit a Microsoft security exam, you know that's a huge feat. I'd now like to hand over to Dirk and Jay to take you through what we're seeing in the market. Thanks, Dirk.
Thanks, Sam, and hello, everybody. I'm Dirk Hodgson. I'm a Director of Security in NTT. And today, what Jay and I would like to do is to take you through the concept of Zero Trust security. And we're going to do that by talking about a particular threat group and really talking about where each part of Microsoft Zero Trust solutions and also Zero Trust more broadly can support your move to a more secure posture. Now, Sam talked a lot about the changes that COVID has brought along to our workforces. If anything, the threat groups have moved significantly quicker than perhaps we've all moved. And I know, like Sam, I've worked from some pretty interesting places over the last couple of years, and certainly my young kids now love to get involved in just about every video conference that I do. So it really has changed the world. From a threat perspective, though, NTT each year conducts a global threat intelligence report. Across the internet backbone that we operate, we see around 40% of the internet each and every day. And we also have around 750 customers working off our security operations center network globally. And out of all of that traffic, one of the main threats that we see is ransomware. Now, you'll see there that it says 6% of detected malware. Indeed, there's a whole lot of other threats out there that are significantly higher in percentage terms. Crypto mining, for example, is becoming increasingly popular at 42%. And we also see a lot of remote access Trojans at around 35%. But ransomware itself, when you start to look at the impact of ransomware, it's a real fear factor, and it creates a real and immediate costs onto business. Let's talk a little bit about some of those costs. Now, ultimately, when we look at the costs of ransomware, it's quite a difficult and complex analysis to undertake. Firstly, you have to look at ransoms that have been paid, and as we all know, not everybody declares that they've paid a ransom, and indeed in some countries it's illegal to do so, so they definitely don't declare that they've paid a ransom. Hence, a lot of the data that we get on this either comes from anonymous surveys or more accurately from analysis of the blockchain. There's a number of organizations that conduct this analysis, and you'll see there that in the year 2020, $18 billion was lost to the threat of ransomware. That's a big global number, so let's make that a little bit more contextualized to Australia. In the same year, roughly 67% of all organizations in Australia experienced a ransomware incident. To make that very real, let's imagine we were all together in a single room, and let's imagine that you personally haven't experienced a ransomware incident. If you were to turn and look at the person to the left of you, statistically speaking, they probably have, based on that number. And the scary part, I think, is that these numbers are 2020 numbers. Blockchain analysis takes some time, in 2021, 9 out of 12 months saw significantly more attacks than the same month in the year prior. So the threat is absolutely growing. Now, if we zoom in on some of the specific threat groups, next slide, please, Sam. You'll see that there are a few that are really, really prominent out there globally. Conti recently became quite famous in that they declared for one particular side of the conflict occurring in Eastern Europe, and quite quickly after declaring for that side of the conflict, another hacktivist group, Anonymous, that is supporting the other side of the conflict, quite literally went and hacked them and stole their playbooks and made them very public. So if anybody hasn't had a chance to read the Conti playbooks, there's lots of good sources out there like Krebs on Security and the like. Absolutely fascinating read and a must-do for every security professional. DarkSide is another one that's quite famous, particularly for the Colonial Pipeline attacks, which ultimately were the organization being brought to its knees by a ransomware attack on the organization, which subsequently had massive flow-on effects to the rest of the American system when they couldn't transport oil and gas via pipeline across the country. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about Reval. Reval's an interesting group in that they became quite famous when they perpetrated an attack on Kaseya. Kaseya are an IT operations firm. They build software for IT teams to ultimately be able to better manage the environments, the distributed environments that they look after today. Most managed service providers globally will use Kaseya, and a whole lot of organizations, indeed, some of your own organizations may well be using Kaseya right up to the point where they were attacked. And ultimately, Reval were able to infiltrate Kaseya and bring in a malicious hotfix that was then able to be deployed out to a whole range of other organizations who were using Kaseya, which then left them vulnerable to ransomware attack by Reval. Reval also undertook the Uniting Care Queensland attacks. In this case, they were able to bring down a number of Queensland-based hospitals, and the recovery from that quite literally continues to this day. The good news, I guess, though, is that a number of the perpetrators for Reval have actually been brought to justice. So you'll see one fine fellow there sitting in the docks in court, and there's a number of others that have also been indicted. However, they are still, as a group at large, and as recently as 2 days ago, conclusive proof of their ransomware still being deployed was obtained by a US-based security researcher. Next slide. So let's talk about how Reval operate. Reval are a ransomware as a service group. So ultimately, what does this mean? It means that they operate somewhat like a software as a service organization. So they have a supply chain. They use initial access brokers extensively. Reval themselves will do the encryption piece that we'll talk about shortly, and they'll often just buy access to networks to do that. So as a result, no two criminal groups deploy Reval in the same way. It's been noted to be deployed by groups that really do hack your organization. So use vulnerabilities in remote desktop protocol, VPNs, and other tools with known vulnerabilities like VNC and the like. More commonly, though, the way Reval is deployed ultimately is that stolen credentials are purchased by the group, and when MFA is not enabled on those credentials, they're able to use that to gain a foothold or the initial access within your organization. Reval then, at that point, will go into lateral movement. And essentially what this means is they'll use some fairly common tools like Mimikatz that became reasonably famous with the NotPetya attacks a few years back, and a few other common tools as well to look around and see what other legitimate credentials they can find within your network. And this is really important. Once they've established that beachhead, everything else they do is typically with legitimate credentials, so it's quite hard to see. And what they'll be doing is they're looking for the crown jewels. They're looking for the things that, if they go down, are really hard to bring back up and really costly because they want to maximize the impact on you. Domain controllers are a big one for Reval, and in addition, they'll often also move forward and disable security tools. In particular, they'll look at backups and try to make sure that you can't just restore your environment easily without paying them. The next step for Reval is once they've found all of that data, and they'll take several days looking around to find all of the key information, personally identifiable information, domain controller configuration, anything that they think is particularly sensitive, move it to a central location and quite literally zip it up and move it out via a legitimate cloud provider. Mega.nz is one that has been noted to be used on a number of occasions, but it can be all sorts of different cloud providers. And it's only at this point, after they've gained access, after they've moved around, after they've found your data, and after they've taken that data out of the environment to perpetrate a double extortion, that they'll actually hit the button and execute their payload. At this point, it's largely too late. What happens at this point is that they will encrypt everything that they've been able to gain access to, and it all happens very quickly. Reval in particular have quite a fast encryption cycle. And the first thing that your users will see is that their desktop background will change to a dark blue color, and you'll see a screenshot of that on the top right of the slide. And there'll be a message there saying, go to a particular readme.txt. And once they open that file, what they'll see is the ransom notice at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And when you look at this closely, one thing you notice is they're very, very, very good at making it easy for you to pay. They'll even tell you how to go and buy Bitcoin if you've never done it before, and they'll put a bit of pressure on and they'll say, we've locked up your group, we've locked up your environment, we've taken your data, pay us quickly and you'll get all of those things back. Now, a big part of what you'll notice about this is that, as I mentioned before, there's a whole lot of different steps to this process, and it starts at the start, it starts with initial access, and there's all sorts of different points that this attack could be stopped in its tracks before it ever gets to the ransom notice on the right of the screen. We go to the next slide. This is where the concept of zero trust security comes in. Way back in 2009, Forrester, one of the global research houses that specializes in ICT and cybersecurity, first coined the term zero trust. And ultimately what that identified is that networks were being designed such that it was incredibly easy for components to talk to each other. So then establish an initial trust, and then from then on, ultimately data could move backwards and forwards at free will. The idea of zero trust is that this goes away. What zero trust means with all of those components is that if one server wants to talk to another, it needs to verify that the machine or human identity involved is legitimate before it conducts that transaction. So in every case, they're never trusting and they're always verifying that something is actually a legitimate part of the network and that it should be accessing the things that it's accessing. Ultimately, it's the ultimate defense in depth. Every time you want to move from one part of the network to another, it's almost like you're crossing a whole different perimeter. And in 2019, Forrester realized that this only really applied to networks and said, actually, it really should be the same principle that we apply to cloud data and everything else in our IT applications as we become more and more distributed. And this is really where Microsoft comes in. What Microsoft have been able to achieve with their solution set is ultimately a zero trust architecture and a zero trust solution that does genuinely cover all parts of the concept that Forrester first coined over a decade ago, and they've really nailed it in that sense. So I might hand over to Jay to run through what Microsoft brings to the table.
Thanks, Dirk. Hi everyone, my name's Jay. I'm a security architect at Microsoft and I'm very glad to be here with Sam and Dirk and Steve to talk about zero trust. So Sam talked a bit about why there's been this paradigm shift, the changes in how people work, requiring more flexibility than they have in the past, remote and hybrid work scenarios. And then Dirk described some of the evolving complexities of threats and the escalating attacks which organizations are facing today. Now, zero trust, while it isn't a new concept, as per the definition from Dirk, it's now more relevant as a result of these factors. And here we've got Microsoft summarization, basically, of the zero trust security strategy to these three guiding principles. So first, we want to ensure that every access request is strongly authenticated, authorized within policy constraints, and inspected for anomalies before granting access. Everything from the user's identity to the application's hosting environment is used to verify the request and prevent a breach. And to limit the impact of potential breaches, we apply the segmentation policies, employ the principle of least privilege access, and use analytics to help detect and respond quickly. But the essence of zero trust is that the security models which assume safety based on network location are not enough. So aligning with these principles enables organizations to assess and test their environments in order to determine if they're aligning with this strategy. Next slide, please, Sam. So this in turn enables prioritization of the deployment and remediation activities where they can have the greatest impact. So now we're drilling down into a bit more detail in each of the principles. So by leveraging the solutions such as Defender for Endpoint, Azure AD, and conditional access, we can make real-time decisions on how we treat access requests to applications and data. Signals from identities and endpoints such as device health, location, role assignment, and others, they feed into the platform and policies to determine whether we should allow or block access or, for example, prompt for MFA. We know that MFA alone has the ability to reduce identity-based threats by something like 99.9%. Least privilege means that we should be closely guarding any privileged or administrative access. Accounts should only have elevated privileges for a specific time-bound period to perform a specific task, and then those privileges should be removed. We can configure and automate these workflows using privileged identity management. Similarly, we can reduce the attack surface and the likelihood of RDP brute force attacks, like Dirk was mentioning in the Reval campaigns, by minimizing the exposure of management ports to the internet. So we can do this through JIT controls or just-in-time VM access within Azure. And thirdly, further minimizing the opportunity for attackers through assuming breach. So it's not safe to assume that the applications and data stored within a corporate network are safe. And so employing network segmentation, defense in depth approaches, and encrypting data can help to minimize the blast radius. So when we look at this holistically across the Microsoft security portfolio in the context of zero trust, we can see the elements working together. So starting on the left, we have the identities, which are described as the new perimeter. So moving away from traditional network-based perimeter security with firewalls protecting the network, we now look at identities as the new perimeter, along with the endpoints, which forms the foundation of our zero trust security strategy. In the center is the continuous assessment of adaptive policies, leveraging threat intelligence and telemetry, which is used to make those decisions, those real-time decisions, around how we treat requests to access, applications, data, infrastructure, and network resources, which combined with identities and endpoints make up the 6 pillars of zero trust security model that Dirk mentioned before. Then we have Sentinel as the SIEM, or Security Information and Event Management tool, which takes the telemetry and signals from across the entire enterprise, not just within Microsoft workloads, but whether it's cloud, multi-cloud, on-premise, hybrid environments, firewalls, applications, wherever these signals are coming from, and it correlates those logs into alerts and high-fidelity incidents for the security team to perform analysis and investigations. So this is another view of the security portfolio, which is overlaid across like what would be a common attack chain. So providing coverage from the typical endpoints, starting on the left again, we've got protection from things like phishing, email attachments, malicious URLs, which are the most common entry points for attacks. This is achieved through Defender for Office 365. Then as we move through to protection against lateral movement techniques, identity compromise and privilege escalation through the Defender suite and other various security solutions, which when combined provide an end-to-end security solution. To give an example of how the tools work together, we can use a scenario which is very similar to how Reval operates. Say if there's a new phishing campaign discovered. Maybe a user checks their personal webmail from their corporate device. They open an attachment which has embedded malware, and the malware is actually designed to evade traditional AV signatures. So Defender for Endpoint will detect this as abnormal behavior, and it will automatically investigate it, and then it will create a workflow or a sequence to remediate it. And then it can prompt an analyst to actually approve the cleanup of that malware. Or if it's appropriate, you can also set up a workflow to automatically approve those. Then once Defender for Endpoint provides the new malware information, like once that's complete, Defender for Endpoint will take that new malware information, I should say, and provide it back into Microsoft Threat Intelligence. So this triggers the other security capabilities to search for similar malware across other customers and clean it up proactively from mailboxes, devices, etc. So using the threat intelligence and integrated security approach, we're able to benefit from one particular detection and then feed that out across globally to other customers. We can also use things like conditional access, which I mentioned earlier, to block access to enterprise applications from this device until Defender for Endpoint communicates the all clear, as another example. Under Sentinel in this slide, we've got insider risk management. So this is also an important capability which helps to minimize internal risks within the business. So as an example, it can take signals and telemetry from a HR platform, such as a user resignation event or somebody's disgruntled or under review, for example, within the business. And then it will facilitate an anonymized investigation into any advertent or malicious activities in the organization. So if the user starts downloading lots and lots of files from sensitive document repositories or starts uploading files externally, which is something that they don't normally do, it's going to flag that as high risk and then trigger an incident workflow from that. So when we're aligning with zero trust strategies, it means that we have to consider and cater for these possibilities from both internal threats as well as external threats. So lastly, I'll link you to some resources which we'll be able to provide later, but I thought I'd share them here. So Microsoft have published a few key resources which I find really helpful. So you can use these within your organization to do a self-assessment, as example, where you sit on the zero trust journey. So obviously it's a big process to go and align with these security models and strategies. So a common question is like, where do we start? Where should we focus? And using the maturity model, I find, is a really good approach to find out where you're strong and where you've got some areas of where you can do improvement by mapping your controls, procedures, and policies against that maturity model. Then there's also some other resources for planning and deployment guidance for Microsoft Zero Trust. So with that, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to you, Steve, for a demo and how this actually all works together in a real life scenario.
Great. Thanks, Jay. Introductions. My name's Steve Murphy. I'm a principal engineer with NTT. And yeah, I'll be driving the demo. Okay, so what we're going to demonstrate today is how we can protect data which has sensitive information and what tools are available that we can actually see how that sensitive data is actually being consumed. So today we've got Megan. Megan is a finance manager, and she needs to create some sensitive information and send that information to Alex. So through the demo, you'll see Alex securing that document and emailing it to Alex. Alex is going to open that document, and there'll be certain limitations on what he can actually do with that. So he won't be able to save or edit the document or even print it. Then we're going to go through the scenario where Alex's credentials has been compromised. And we're going to try and open that document in a PC located in the UK. And what we're also going to see is some of the alerts that are generated through the administration consoles that somebody in the UK has actually opened up a sensitive document. Okay, so I'll start sharing my screen. Sure that actually works. Okay, could I just confirm people can see my screen?
Yes, that's up.
Great. Okay, so what we have here, we've got Megan's computer. In the background, what we've actually configured is we're using Microsoft Information Protection, and that's actually watching for sensitive information. Now, we've targeted Megan because she's head of finance or finance manager. So when she starts creating a document with sensitive information, Microsoft Information Protection is going to prompt that Megan to actually set some permissions onto the document, and it's going to automatically label the document as having finance data. So let's go through that. Just open up Word. is data. Don't type in credit card number. So what's actually happening in the background, Microsoft Information Protection is examining this document for any sensitive information. So it's doing some pattern matching. We're not obviously limited to financial information. It can be medical information, it can be passports. There's various sensitive information types that are available out of the box. But what is also available is you can actually create your own sensitive information as well, something unique to your organization. We're just waiting for my demo to prompt me that it's detected some information. So what I might just do, copy that a few times. Okay, it's interesting. Ah, great, finally came up. That's a relief. Okay, so what's actually happened is Microsoft Information Protection has decided this is a this document contains sensitive information, and I'm being asked to restrict permission to this document. That's part of the policy. So as a user, I'm going to share this document with Alex and Alex only. So I'll put in Alex's name, and I'm going to give him read permissions. I can select more options, and I can see I can expire the document as well. I'm going to deny access for Alex to print it, and he won't be even able to copy any of the content out of that document as well. He can request additional permissions, so if he does need to edit the document, he can request permissions from me because I'm creating the document. So, okay to that. And you can also see, as part of the policy, this document, you'll see at the policy tip at the top, it says the organization automatically applied the label finance data, but that label could be whatever makes sense to your organization. It could be things like confidential data or top secret, whatever classic, whatever label you want to come up with. And you can see this document also had a header of finance data labeled in the footer as well, and there's a watermark as well. All this is customizable. You can change the size if you want a header or footer, but it's given the visual indication that there's something different about this document. It's being protected. I should also point out this is protected. The document's also encrypted, and regardless of what Active Directory permissions, so things like if you're a domain administrator, you will not be able to open this document. It's restricted specifically to Megan and Alex. So I'm just going to save that document. Here's some data. Save that. Okay. And we're going to email it to Alex now. Is the data, and I'll just attach the file. And in this instance, I'm just going to attach it directly rather than just sending a link. I'm going to send that. Now, as part of the policy, because of who I am, and you can have different policies for different people, but because I'm representing Megan, who's head of finance, the policy says I need to set a label on even emails as well. So I'm going to choose finance data. I'm going to hit send. Okay. Now I'm going to flick over to Alex's computer. Outlook. Okay. So this is the email I've received from Megan, and you'll notice I've got a padlock symbol in the mail message there that indicates that it's being protected. And also the email itself has been labeled or has had the header and the footer indicating that this is finance data. Again, giving you that visual indication to the user. This is sensitive information. Treat it appropriately. If I open the document, so I'm representing Alex, as you can see. If I try and save the document, I can't save it. I can't print it. If I try and edit the document, which obviously you can't see, but I'm going to try and edit it. But in the bottom left-hand corner, if you can see that text, I appreciate it could be kind of small. I'll just bring that message up again. It actually says you can't make this change because the selection is locked. So it's a protected document. Okay. If I look at my permissions, I can see I can view it. I can't do anything else. But I do have that option down the bottom there to request additional permissions, and that would go back to me again to say, hi, I need to be able to edit this document or copy it, whatever I need. And she makes that choice on whether I can do that. Okay, so let's go through the scenario. Let's pretend this document has left the organization. So somebody in the UK has managed to get hold of it. So I've got a PC here, and just to prove that I am in the UK. So Bing Maps has identified me as being somewhere in London. So I have some other protected documents that I previously protected before the demo. I'm just going to open it up. And I'm just going to ignore that. So this file was protected in the same way. And it says, hey, you're not allowed to open this document. Even though I've got access to the file's encrypted, but it's asking me to sign in to actually open it. So I'm just going to cancel that. And this time around, we will sign in. Because we're going through the scenario where Alex's credentials have been compromised. So I'm going to log in as Alex. Given that, oops, let's get the focus on the screen. Oops, I'm missing a few numbers there. So don't forget, I'm just representing somebody external to the organization. I've got hold of the file. I've got hold of Alex's credentials. And I'll accept that. And I can open that document. As you can see, I've signed in as Alex. I can see the credit card number. I can see that. So how does that get represented in the administration console? So in this demonstration, we haven't actually taken any proactive data to proactive action to actually stop that from happening, because it may be something that it may have legitimately been Alex doing this particular activity. But what it does look like in the administration console, this is the console Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. So if we look at one of these events, this is one of the alerts that gets generated. So we can see that a document with a sensitivity label has been opened. We can see that Alex was the user. We've identified in the console, we've actually configured the UK location as being a risky location to open documents. If I click on the raw data, I can actually see the name of the file that's been opened and the user account who actually opened it. And even things like the platform, the application. So it just gives us a lot of good information to try and find out what just happened. So in the policy itself, if we have a look at the policies, So this is the policy that's actually generated the alert. So at the moment, it's sending an alert within the console. It's also sending an alert to Megan as well, who's head in charge of finance, that somebody in the UK has actually opened up a finance document. We can send text messages as alerts as well. And depending on what we want to take action on, we could potentially notify the user, notify somebody else that's actually happened. We'd even suspend the account as well. If we fear that wasn't normal activity, we need to disable that account so that data is protected. Okay, that ends the demonstration. It's back to you, Sam.
Stephen. Sorry, just get myself back organised. Thank you for the demo, and thanks, Jay and Dirk. That has prompted some questions from those that are attending, but if anyone else does have any questions, we do have a little bit of time now to answer them, so please feel free to place them into the Q&A. We'll get to them now. So I'm going to ask the first question to Jay. Jay, does Microsoft ZTNA also cover workforce for OT networks, and how does it separate system identity from user identity?
Thanks. Yeah, good question. So Microsoft's Zero Trust solution. So absolutely, we have a solution which covers OT networks. So within Azure, there's an offering called Defender for IoT. Actually, what Defender for IoT is it's an agentless scanning technology where we can deploy a sensor out into OT networks, and it does deep packet inspection for like traditional OT network protocols. And then that can be either kept on premise, and we can do risk assessment, vulnerability assessments, asset inventories, and that type of thing to get visibility across traditional OT networks. And optionally, you can cloud connect that up into Azure to Defender for IoT, and then you can get a integrated asset inventory across your OT assets, IoT assets, whether that's enterprise IoT, like cameras and door locks and that sort of thing, as well as your Defender for Endpoint or managed devices. So basically, the vision there is that we will have holistic monitoring solutions for IT and OT networks, spanning from leveraging things like Defender for Endpoint through to Defender for IoT, depending on the scenario. In terms of how we separate users and identities, so we can also integrate Defender for IoT back into Sentinel. And then Sentinel is going to be able to correlate those attacks. So there's built-in playbooks, automation workflows, dashboards, and detection rules within Sentinel for multi-stage attack scenarios. So if you'll have attacks like there's Triton attack and a bunch of other ones that have happened where it will actually start in the IT network and traverse into OT. So using Sentinel, we can get actually track those incidents as long as you have the integration from Defender for IT as well as the other IT networks. And then we can use the user entity and behavior analytics, so the UEBA capabilities within Sentinel, to do anomaly detection and provide that endpoint entity as well as user entity data enrichment. I hope that answers all the points. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. Dirk, I'm going to direct the next question to you. Are there any real-world stats or case studies on the impact of an implemented Zero Trust solution on reducing ransomware and other cyber attacks? Would the solution stop a Reval type attack?
Yeah, and thank you, Robert. Great question. Cyber statistics are a little bit like crime statistics more broadly. So, if you think about an analogy of somebody who might be going to break into your house, what do? They often will walk past the house first to see whether it's occupied or whether they're going to be able to get in easily or otherwise. So they're performing reconnaissance, which is one of the first things that happens in cybersecurity as well. If, for example, they see a very large dog, or they see an alarm sensor, or they see bars on the door, or anything that makes it look like it's going to be really difficult, that criminal may just walk past and go to the next house. So realistically, did the dog or the alarm or the solution actually stop the attack. It's very difficult to ever quantify that statistic in the very physical, real world type of crime. Cybercrime's a little bit similar in that sense, in that we often say that defenders think in lists and attackers think in flows. The attacker, if you look at things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, will start with their reconnaissance. And in a lot of cases, that's the initial access broker literally scanning the internet for vulnerabilities or looking at password dump sites, so on and so forth, and going, hey, let's go and get hold of either buying access through compromised credentials or simply finding a vulnerability to begin with. So as a result, when you look at Microsoft solutions, and if I just use the example that Jay just gave of using the Defender for OT capability, if you have implemented that solution as part of your Zero Trust architecture, at that point, the defender's never going to find an exposed and vulnerable, the attacker will never find an exposed and vulnerable server. So the solution has actually stopped that attack before it even got started and before it got to the point where you see the ransom notice and can comprehensively tie it to the Reval group. So I guess, summarizing all of that down, in terms of actual statistics saying, hey, Microsoft has stopped Reval in particular on this number of occasions, that statistic won't ever be available. However, Jay and the team at Microsoft do have some excellent statistics on the percentage of phishing attacks, for example, that they stop, which can be the first step in terms of gaining initial access. They also have some great stats for how their vulnerability management capability works, and in terms of the information protection capability, you've seen how granular that can get to stop people being able to find sensitive information and then also stop being able to exfiltrate that information as well. So those stats are there. It just doesn't really ever tie it back to saying Reval, Conti, DarkSide, etc. We've actually stopped that with this solution.
That's great. Thank you for that, Dirk. We've probably got time for one more question, so I'm going to direct this to Stephen. Stephen, in your demo, you showed us sort of, I guess, making a whole country a risk zone for our security. But if I'm moving to a flexible workforce and I do want to allow people to travel, do I have to open up a high-risk country to all my employees, or is there some way I can be more granular in how I'm securing the PCs in those countries?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of flexibility in the policy to actually only apply it to, for example, let's consider a situation like yourself. We could place you within a security group that says, yes, we expect you to go to the UK. We're not going to generate alerts because it's expected travel. However, for everybody else, generated alert. So we can do that through AD security groups, and that would be a way to achieve that, because obviously we don't want alerts going off when it's legitimate travel.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Again, thank you to all our panelists. Sorry, trying to get my mouse back onto the slide screen. Always a good task. So thank you to Jay and Dirk for their knowledge today, I guess, and teaching us a little bit more about Zero Trust, and Stephen for the great demo. I think I've definitely learned that, you know, we're looking at security in a whole different manner these days, and if we're not protecting ourselves right from the start, right from the device, the user, the identity, you know, you don't know what you're going to be at threat for. So I think for anyone that is using an older model, it shows that it really is time to start moving your security posture and thinking about different ways of working. If anything, I would say if you're going to start somewhere and just start today. I mean, there's nothing wrong with starting a conversation, and NTT are here to help you with that. And we would love to come in and sit down and talk to you about your current security landscape and where there might be some benefits in moving how you're working. We've been having some great conversations with customers around their E5 licensing and having a look at where the E5 and Zero Trust models from Microsoft could help to strengthen your security posture, but also maybe remove some of the complexities. We're seeing a lot of customers with, say, 3 or 4 different licenses for identity that you know, is costing them a significant amount of money every year, but could be, you know, a lot of cost savings and reduce complexity by just moving to what's in that E5 suite. So we would be more than happy to have that conversation with anyone on the call today. If you are sort of a bit further ahead in your journey and you want to start activating some of those security features, or you want to start looking at what the Microsoft Zero Trust model could mean for your organizations, we've partnered with Microsoft to be able to offer 2-day workshops around that journey. So the workshops we can look at are around securing identity, threat protection, sensitive data, managing and investigating risks, Azure Sentinel, and the hybrid security, cloud security. So please, if you are interested in that, also reach out. We'd be more than happy to discuss whether one of those workshops or a different approach might be best for you. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. And if you do have any other questions for the panel following this, please reach out. We'd be more than happy to talk to you about security. Enjoy your day, everyone. Thanks again.